You're hanging out with those bad guys and you're hanging in bars.
Yeah.
And you're watching them do bad things.
Yeah.
I danced in the devil's playground, Matt.
Mm-hmm.
And what I know now is I was not wearing my salvation armor. I wasn't wearing the armor of God.
Welcome back to another episode of Steadfast Men Unscripted. I'm your host, Matt Antis. Today we have a very special guest. My good friend Chuck Ondo is here on the show. He's the very first veteran, actually. I forgot to add that, Chuck.
Oh, that's good.
Very first veteran to ever be on the show. So I give everybody an intro for the show. Chuck Ondo is a father. He is a husband. He is a former state trooper. He is a former U.S. Marine. He is a owner of a thriving barber shop here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And lastly, he is the co-founder and president of Semper Mission, which we will get to in the interview. So, Chuck, thank you. Thank you for being on the show.
Matt, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for that intro. And I just wanted to add one little note to that. As of April 3rd, I'm also a grandfather.
No way.
So we can add grandfather
Wow.
to my repertoire.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Which is just great. It was such a great experience, and it was such a full circle moment. You know, I had my son when I was 30, and my son's 30 now.
No way.
So I went out to meet my grandson for the first time, and I was feeding him, and then I handed him to my son to burp him. And my son was holding my grandson, Owen. I looked over, and it was like my my son's life flashed before my eyes. Those previous 30 years went by in a second, and I got all nostalgic, and I got all teary-eyed, and I was like, this is full circle.
Yeah.
You know, when you have a grandchild, it's like getting your report card as a parent. Hey, I did okay. I raised a human that's now raising humans. So that was great.
That's awesome. Which is another reason of why, like, the guys I want to have on the show, fathers, grandfathers now, to just simply learn from you. Well, you know, what have you been through in life? What have you learned? And how your faith, of course, has impacted that. So,
Absolutely.
So start us off, and we start everybody off where you're from. You are local here to Pittsburgh?
Yeah, I grew up in Pittsburgh. I grew up right near Kennywood in the town of West Mifflin.
In Homestead or East Pittsburgh?
West Mifflin is the name of the
West
town.
Mifflin?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the township.
Borough. Yeah, okay. Awesome. So my parents are from East Pittsburgh. My dad's from East Pittsburgh, Turtle Creek, not too far.
Very close.
Awesome. So you grew up there, then you went straight in the Marines right after high school?
Yeah, I enlisted in the Marine Corps on my 18th birthday. Wow. I wanted to enlist when I was 17, and my mom said absolutely not. So I graduated high school, and 8 o'clock in the morning on my 18th birthday, the recruiter picked me up, and by noon, I was a Marine.
No way.
You know, I had enlisted, and you know, my mom didn't speak to me for about 2 weeks. She got over that though quickly. But it was such a calling to be a Marine.
Yeah. So she obviously was not okay with it. That's what I was going to ask.
At first, no.
Yeah.
And right after I had enlisted, a couple months after, I was on a delayed entry program, and I remember I came home from work, and my mom and everyone was gathered around the TV, and they were watching the news, and it was October 23rd, 1983, and it was the first terrorist bombing. It was the bombing in Beirut, where 244 Marines and a few sailors were killed.
Jeez.
And my mom, with tears in her eyes, looked at me and said, "Chuck, see, this is why I don't want you to be a Marine."
Yeah.
And I looked at her and I said, "No, Mom, that's why I have to be a Marine."
Wow.
That was my 9/11.
Yeah.
And then 3 months later, I was in boot camp.
Okay, and then you went to boot camp. Where'd you go for boot camp?
Paris Island, South
Island,
Carolina.
yeah.
So either in Paris Island or San Diego if you're west of the
East
Mississippi.
Coast. Okay.
And I was initially stationed in. I went to school in Alabama. I went to ammunition school, explosive school. Came back and was at Camp Lejeune for several years. I went to Camp Pendleton. I was in Okinawa, Japan for a year. And after 4 years, I just thought, okay, this was great. I served my country. It's not what I want to do the rest of my life.
Yeah.
But my biggest regret is not staying in the Marines.
Really?
Biggest
Not
regret.
doing 20 years?
What's that?
Not doing 20 years?
Yeah,
or
at
just,
least in some capacity.
Yeah,
I
staying
met a
longer.
really cool state senator on Memorial Day. I was speaking at an event, and I spoke right after him, and then we talked for a while. And he got to hear a little bit of the story that we're going to share tonight. And he was like, Chuck, that's so awesome. He goes, you've done so many things in your life. He said, do you have any regrets? And I said, well, the only really regret I have in life is that I didn't stay in the Marines, especially as close as I am to military people now
I was gonna
with the
say,
Semper Fi mission.
huge.
And here's a state senator. And he said, Chuck, he said, that's also my biggest regret.
No way.
He said, I'm a state senator. He goes, but how I prefer people to know me as a corporal in the United States Marine Corps, infantryman, Iraq, and which was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's Senator Devlin Robinson, great guy.
Oh, okay. That's awesome. Yeah. Local here to Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. So was your mom and dad together when you grew up, though?
Yeah, I grew up in a very stable home.
Yeah.
I was one of 7. My father was a steel worker.
Mm-hmm.
My mom was a homemaker. And, I grew up I went to a Catholic school for 6 years. We lived about a mile from church. So church and God was always a part of my life. And as we talk a little bit later, you'll see a lot of the charity work that I do was instilled at me at a very young age. My mom, who was a single mom, I think she had an 11th grade education. She eventually was the president of an organization, a Catholic charity. It's called Ladies of Charity. So when all of us kids grew, she was, and their charity focused on taking care of elderly people and shut-ins. So that was a part of my life from the earliest I can remember.
Wow, they modeled that pretty good for you then. That's really cool. So you got out of the Marines at 22 then?
Correct.
And then where did life take you?
Well, back then, I remember it was shortly after I had got out, right before Christmas. It was a couple of days after Christmas. I opened the newspaper, looking for, okay, what am I going to do? Am I going to be a blue-collar guy? Am I going to go to college? And it was January 2nd, 1988. I read the newspaper and I saw an ad that the Pennsylvania State Police were giving their test. And I'm like, I'll give this a shot.
Yeah.
A lot of guys go through criminal justice courses and it's their whole life. I wanted to be a cop. For me, it was kind of a whim.
Yeah.
But then lo and behold, a year later I was set to go to the academy.
Okay. I don't know much about the police academy. I've heard that it's similar to boot camp.
Very similar. So the Pennsylvania State Police, Matt, they're the very first state police agency in the country. In 1905, the governor of Pennsylvania, Governor Pennypacker, enacted the first state patrol.
Okay.
So the state police in Pennsylvania and New Jersey have the strictest, hardest, toughest basic training. I went in the academy from June to November, so it was 28 weeks. You don't leave. Every other weekend you get a day off.
Wow!
But it's straight through. It's very intense. And I always tell people that the running and the physical part of becoming a state trooper was harder than being a Marine.
Interesting.
In the Marines, or like you were in the Air Force, you run in formation.
Yeah.
Here, like all of our runs in the morning, the instructors would just take off and you'd have to chase them. And literally running from roads through farms out in Hershey, Pennsylvania, running through wooded areas. And I always thought, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
But then, once you become a state trooper and you can go anywhere in the Pennsylvania state, you're going to be chasing bad guys through farms and yards and woods and it's not all a street race.
Interesting.
So it was really cool. It was a really intense training. And early on, God has blessed me with the ability to be a leader. And as a Marine, I was meritoriously promoted up through corporal. And then I get to the State Police Academy, and within 2 days, the class selects me to become the class leader.
Man,
and
natural.
So I was. The title is student leader. I was the student leader, and I had another gentleman from Pittsburgh. His name is John Bay, and we're going to get into this story later. With our prison ministry, where I recently crossed paths with John Bay again. So here we were, we led the state police class, and then 36 years later, God hooks us back up to go save souls. It's just absolutely amazing. But John was a great guy. He was, he spent 38 years in the Air Force. He retired as a captain with the state police, and he was the chief of police in the city of Lancaster for 2 years.
Wow.
And then the county of Dauphin hired him to take over what's called the Dauphin County Prison.
Okay.
And he was completely retired from police work.
Yeah.
And this just happened a few months ago. That's why it's so fresh. But he felt God calling him to come into this prison and get it straightened out. They had all kind of corruption, drugs, a lot of their lot of their guards were corrupt.
Okay.
The warden was corrupt.
Okay.
He totally cleaned house. And then he called me in January of this year. And he said, Brother Chuck, I've been following you. Been watching this Semper Fi mission on Facebook. He said, we're ready for you. And I was like, what do you mean, John? He said, this jail needs Jesus.
Wow.
And that to me was just incredible.
Yeah.
And so I took a team of guys from the Semper Fi mission and some people that are regular volunteers with us. And we went out a couple months ago and we preached in 13 different prison blocks in 8 hours.
No way.
It went from one to the other and just watched so many people. There's so much hurt. There's so much guilt and embarrassment and stigma that comes with being incarcerated.
Yeah.
And to tell them about Jesus and to watch, block after block, to watch all these men and women, and I've never preached to women in a prison setting, to watch them give their lives to the Lord was amazing. And that all started 36 years ago as a state trooper.
Yeah, man, it's amazing. And to speak to like social media and people who you don't think are following you or any of that, that does actually matter. But that's so cool that you reconnected with him. So you become a state trooper. You become the student leader, of course, and then you work your way up through that. You graduate the training. Then where do you get shipped off? Like in a city or a town or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
So with the state police, I think they've since rescinded the order. But initially, back in the late '80s when I got on, you weren't allowed to come back to your home troop.
Yeah.
So I was from Pittsburgh. I couldn't come back to Pittsburgh. The thought behind that was they didn't want guys with less than 3 years on the job being around their college roommates or their friends or their high school buddies.
Yeah.
They wanted you to get really a solid background in policing before you came across any situations like that. So being 22, the openings or where I could have gone were either up in the northern part of Pennsylvania or to Philadelphia. And being a young guy, I'm like, I'll go to Philly. And everyone, of course, they're like, what are you, crazy?
Yeah.
I had never been to Philadelphia. Now I'm going to be a police officer there. And so I initially went to the state police barracks in Philadelphia.
Okay. Downtown.
And the barracks in Philadelphia, there's 3 of them in that troop. The one that I went to initially covered the highways.
Okay.
So if you think of Pittsburgh and the Parkway and some of the major interstates, out there it's an expressway into the city. It's Route 476, parts of the Turnpike, another Route 309, Route 422. We were the highway guys out there responding to, the accidents and doing drug interdiction and that's kind of what started my career and led me to become an undercover officer was the amount of narcotics that I saw coming in and out of Philadelphia.
Really?
And it's a hub. You got New York, Philadelphia, and Baltimore are all within close driving distance, and they're all epicenters. And I started to work and have a lot of success in being able to stop people and do interdictions and get people to consent to searches and started seizing a lot of narcotics. When you seize narcotics from a suspect, the first thing you want to do is, okay, where'd you get this from? It's like fishing, Matt, get the little guy and you want to get bigger.
Yeah.
So I started interviewing my suspects and then introducing them to undercover officers to become informants.
Interesting.
And it led me to working with a lot of undercover detectives that would take the information. Okay, what house did you buy this drugs in? Who did you get it from?
Yeah.
And you start developing those informants and working with the undercover team. And within a year and a half, I decided that I had enough time on the highway.
Yeah.
I want to go and I want to make a difference, make an impact, and work undercover.
Yeah, and especially if you have a knack for it, like it sounds like you did. It's like putting a puzzle together.
It really is.
Just
and it's you've got to have like that sixth sense.
Yeah.
You use probable cause to make the stop, but then you gotta outwit the people that you're interviewing, and I love it because it was quick paced.
Yeah.
And then right around the time that I had about 3 years on the job that I became an undercover detective.
Okay.
I also, once you get 3 years on the job, I put in for and always aspired to be part of the state police SWAT team, which is called the SERT team, SERT, Special Emergency Response Team. And after 3 years, There are 300-400 guys that put in for that for those slots every year. It's a brutally intense 2-day tryout, and I was lucky enough. Over 300 and some guys tried out. 2 of us made it that year, and then I became a SWAT team sniper. So in addition to being an undercover detective,
Yeah.
I was also part of the CERT team, and we would get called out to do high-risk search warrants. We would be on hostage situations, barricaded gunmen. We would do interdiction stops. We trained every month, and that really kept me in shape. And that was just part of who I was then. You know,
I didn't know about that. I knew about the undercover. I didn't know you were a sniper.
Yeah, and that's kind of, you know, as we get into this a little bit now, you'll hear, you know, that my life had become almost overwhelmed with seeing trauma, traumatic incident after traumatic incident. And I know my mom, back to mom again, you know, she didn't want me to be a Marine. And then my God, he's a trooper. And then now you want to be on the SWAT team? She's like, Chuck, I just don't get it. Or she used to call me Charles. Okay. Charles, I don't get it. Why do you want to do this? And I said, Mom, you know, part of me inside is a protector, and I care about people. And if police officers are in trouble, they have one option to call, and that's the SWAT team. And I said, and I want to be the protector of other police officers. So it's always been instilled in me to give back, and to take that. And I love pushing myself physically and mentally to that next level.
Interesting. Where do you think you got the protector trait from?
You know, Matt, that's interesting. You know, my father was a World War II veteran, but I've had over 43 people in my immediate family serve in the military. And just 2 days ago on June the 8th, or it was yesterday actually, right? I had an uncle that was killed on D-Day +1. So the second day of the Normandy invasion, he was a glider pilot. He was 19 years old, and he was shot down and killed. And a couple weeks later, my dad, who was 17, enlisted. You know, he wasn't drafted. He enlisted, and he said, man, I lost my best friend, my brother. I got to go make a difference. So that's something that's, you know, we didn't talk about it a lot as kids or growing up or with my uncles. I've got several uncles who were like just true part of the greatest generation, true war heroes, 82nd Airborne. My one uncle, his name is Henry. Uncle Henry was part of the OSS, which is now the CIA. So he was an 82nd Airborne guy, and he used to go undercover in German missile munition factories and pose as a worker, because my family was from Austria, so he spoke German. And he would pose as a worker in an undercover capacity and then detonate and blow up missile silos and things like that. Just so that was all in my family. And then it's just something that has always been a part of my life. Like, I always want to look out for anyone that's being bullied, you know.
What do you think that this generation of guys doesn't have then? Like you just described, like, you know, you grew up, joined the Marines 18, you want to protect and serve. You said your dad and then your grandfather like wanted to go and just serve the country. Do you think that's changed over time, or
I think it's changed somewhat, Matt, but having the barber shop and, you know, Valor Men's Grooming is dedicated to the military. So I get to have a lot of customers come in my barbershop now that are serving or recently served or that are veterans. And what I've found out, especially over the last 3 or 4 years, having my nonprofit organization and working with veterans, is there are a ton of heroes out there. And nobody knows their story yet. And I had at one point, you know, kind of had the blanket statement, this is a soft generation. And there are parts of it that are, man. But there's a ton of true heroes out there, guys that really stuck their neck on the line. One in particular is a guy that I met while doing prison ministry. And just last week, he touched my heart. You know, he's one of these guys that I met while I was in the jail. He was an Army Ranger. He was a highly decorated Army Ranger that kind of fell into a crazy lifestyle with alcohol and drugs. And there was something about our interaction. Immediately, he started being drawn to when I come into jail, like we do a 2-hour presentation, where he's the first one there, wanting to go, letting us pray with him, telling us how God's really working on his heart. And, you know, as soon as I would come in to visit him, he's mentioning that he read this in the Bible and he read that in the Bible. But he was recently released, and I got to take him to church for the first time 2 weeks ago. And when I picked him up, this is the first time not seeing him in prison clothes, right? He comes over and he gives me a big hug. And he says, Chuck, I don't think you know the impact you have on lives. And, you know, just being humble, I'm like, I'm just doing what the Lord tells me to. And he said, no, you seriously have changed the course of my direction. And he holds out his hand and he said, I want you to hold this for me. He said, on October 23rd of this year, I'm going to have 1 year sober. And I want you to pin this back on my chest. And he hands me his Purple Heart.
Man. That's amazing.
Man, that hit me because, you know, you've been in the military and to earn a Purple Heart, to be injured in combat is a serious deal. And it's such an honor. Anything that we receive in the military is an honor. But then to be the one that he feels worthy enough, it's so humbling. It's so humbling to have that impact. And as we talk more, I'll get into more stories about that and what we're doing now. But there's a ton of heroes out there still. And
that's encouraging. Hearing you say, like, there's a lot of heroes, their stories aren't shared yet, which just encourages me even more, because that's the purpose of what I'm doing here. You know, like, I want to just I feel that way. I feel like there's so many guys out there that are living the day to day, you know, raising kids, taking care of their wife, going to work every day, and nobody knows what they're doing, but they're showing up every day and they're serving the Lord and they believe in God, and they're making an impact on people's lives. And so I want to highlight people like that.
And it's interesting, Matt, because the whole idea behind the Semper Fi mission is to create God's army. And we've been, that gentleman's name was Scott, and I can go down a laundry list of probably 15 to 30 more men like Scott that we met either in a homeless setting, we met at the VA hospital, we met in an outreach for homeless people, or just on the street going to visit people in tents. We've met them, we've pulled them out of the dark, and now they're part of our whole mission to go pull that next one out. And that's something that we say all the time. You know, I tell people when you see a change in their life, I'm like, you know, God didn't pull you out of this pit just to, okay, now I have a good life. No, he's enabled you now to go pull that next guy up out of the pit. And that's kind of what our
logo
our logo is, and
I love it.
And it's one brother pulling another up and leading them to the cross and leading them to salvation, and then creating that army. It's been amazing. You know, our nonprofit has only been official since last September, so we're not even a year old, and we have impacted thousands of lives here in the Pittsburgh area. It's been great. That's
incredible. All right, so you're a state trooper. You become undercover, then you become a sniper. Then tell us the next chapter.
Yeah, so that's where my life kind of got a little lost. And one of the things that I want to point out is God has always been close to me. And we could do a whole nother show. Over my 10-year career with the state police, I have 31 accommodations for bravery above and beyond the call of duty or investigations that I was part of. And a lot of them from serious automobile accidents to shootings that I was involved in, being on the other side of it. God has always been with me. But what I found while I was working undercover, I had done a long stint of undercover work with the mob in Philadelphia. And in order to fit in, especially with that clientele, you've got to spend a lot of time with those people. And I know my undercover ruse was I posed as... We had this informant. She was a female. I posed as her cousin Nick from New Jersey. You know, so I became Nick in New Jersey. I mean, I had an address, fake ID. cars registered in different names.
Really?
And I hung out with a lot of bad guys. And right around this time, it was mid '90s, so it was like at the height of the opioid crisis or the pill crisis. OxyContins, and the investigations that I worked, there were top level mob associates that were controlling all of the pill market in and out of Philadelphia. And when you're hanging out with those bad guys, and you're hanging in bars, and you're watching them do bad things, I danced in the devil's playground, Matt. And what I know now is I was not wearing my salvation armor. I wasn't wearing the armor of God. I was kind of almost wanting to emulate their how they acted. And they're tough guys, and people look up to them. And Hollywood does movies on mobsters. They're really bad people, but when you're around it and you're not protecting yourself, and I wasn't going to church on any type of regular basis, I kind of fell into that lifestyle and to things that I'm not proud of. Not being faithful to the person I was married to, and running around all hours of the night drinking, and it's part of your job, but it's kind of like, hey, this is okay. This is what we do. We're working cases. We're making arrests. And I started drinking way too much, and alcohol started to creep into my life, and I started to almost live a double life. I would work my 8-hour shift as a cop, but then spend another 2 hours sitting in a bar. And it was alcohol. It was so accepted as a police officer. Hey, that's what you do. You have a bad accident, pull a child from hey, let's go to the bar. Let's go to the bar. Every cop precinct has their local bar where, it's like your cheers and everyone's hanging out in it. And it didn't take long for that to kind of take over who Chuck was. And the lines started to get blurred. And there was a series of traumatic events that I was involved in. Some of them were shootings. In an undercover capacity, I witnessed a murder from me to you. I watched this car full of guys get out, shoot the guy next to me, and then they took off on foot. I stayed in an undercover capacity, but I chased the shooter like 32 blocks, ended up catching him and arresting him. And it wasn't until later that night that I realized what just happened. I'm standing on a corner. I see a car pull up, a guy jump out, shoot someone that kills him. He actually shot 2 people. I catch the guy and I think, okay, I did an okay job as a cop, catching a bad guy. But, that's a really close call in life. And you start to almost feel like you're invincible. And then you can be a little more reckless. You're like, I just caught a murderer. I can go drink and drive. Who's going to pull me over? And everyone kind of surrounds you with that. So involved in a number of shootings. One of the cases that I was working, I had an informant, and I became pretty close with him. And, people, when they become an informant, Matt, they'll say to you, I got to be careful, giving you information, I can end up dead. And you hear that, and it is a real thing. But this ended up being the real thing. I had an informant that I can't say he was a friend, but he was an associate.
Okay.
And for giving us and for giving Chuck information was killed. And I had to go speak to his mom and say, hey, I'm sorry that so-and-so's not with us anymore. And he was doing a good job, and then you get the lash out from the parents, how do you live with yourself? How do you put people in these positions? And, I started to take it personal, and I started to see things. And the undercover life coupled with being on the SWAT team, it was just constant.
It's a lot.
Constant situations of stress, doing high-risk search warrants, going into drug houses in Philadelphia where, there's 5 or 6 pit bulls coming at you, and you're killing dogs, and it all becomes blurred of what's good, what's not. You're in court cases where you think a bad guy's going to get time, and, he gets half the sentence that he should. And you're like, why am I risking my life? So I was in my 9th year as a trooper, and I accepted a promotion to corporal.
Okay.
And that was going to take me out of my undercover capacity.
Okay.
And I think that was like the perfect timing. I had turned that promotion down several times, but now here I am. starting to get overwhelmed with it all. And I take the promotion to corporal.
Okay.
So I'm back in uniform.
Yeah.
I get stationed in the middle of the state. I was in this tiny little town of Frackville.
Okay.
And it was my second night there. And I had an incident, Matt, that really affected me. At the time I was married and I had an 18-month-old son. So I was in this little town of Frackville, and a call comes across the radio, an infant drowning at such and such address. I was literally 2 minutes and 34 seconds away. Like some of these times you never forget.
Yeah.
I get there, I run into this house, and this house is just, a typical small town USA. It was a single mom. She had 7 children. She was 27 years old. She had 7 children. I run up these steps, and there's little kids running around, like your boys, naked, and they're screaming.
Yeah.
And I walk into this bathroom, and there's this woman, and she's standing there with her head in her hands, and she's in shock. And I look down in the tub, and there's this infant face down in about 1 foot of water, 2 feet of water. And I pulled the little guy out, and I gave him CPR. And when you're out in a small county like that, EMS isn't a minute away. And I gave this little guy CPR for 13 minutes. The EMS crew got there. They continued CPR. We got him breathing. We got the water out of his lungs. We get him breathing.
Wow.
And I'm there completing the investigation, and I get a call from the other troopers that went to the hospital with the child, and the little guy died.
Oh, geez.
And the tough part of that, Matt, was I was numb, and I drove home that night. It was about an hour and a half from where I lived, and I drove home, and I got into my house, and my son was 18 months old.
Man.
And I took him out of the crib and held him for a few hours and cried.
I bet you did.
And then you start to question yourself. Did I do enough? Did I do everything right medically? And, should he still be alive? And, you start blaming yourself. And then from there, that kind of triggered something in me where every incident that I was involved in the past, I start wondering, if it was a shooting, did I do everything right? Was I justified? And you want to escape from that. And I found that alcohol was the way that I started to escape from that. And through that whole time, I'm going through all these, when you're working undercover, you're working crazy shifts, right? My home life was falling apart, the person I was married to. And I found out that there was a lot of indiscretion. And I started blaming myself for it, like, well, you're never around. That's why this is happening or that's happening. And, when I worked undercover, even when I was on the road stopping people, I would often ask people that were informants or that I had arrested, like, why do you do drugs?
Yeah.
And the overwhelming response that I would get was, man, it just makes me escape. I escape from life. If you had my life, you would understand, And, when I was a cop and so I knew someone was using drugs, whether I arrested them or they were an informant working with me, I would often say to them, man, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, where's your moral compass? What is wrong with you? What I have since learned to ask is, man, what happened to you? So I didn't know any better, and I didn't know what was happening to Chuck, but I just knew that, like most of those people, I wanted to escape. And I was about 9.5 years as a state trooper, and I was a corporal, and I was working in a barracks, and one of my jobs was to destroy evidence. And it would literally be
drug evidence.
That comes back from a court case. You sign the report. If it's a small amount, you flush it down the toilet. If it's a large amount, you take it into an incinerator. And at that point in my life, I had used drugs for the first time in my life, and it completely took over and controlled my life.
Man.
When I worked undercover, Matt, I had long hair and a beard.
Yeah.
My friends would say to me, well, Chuck, you walk walk the walk, talk the talk, you play the part. Aren't you afraid that you're going to fall into that?
Yeah.
And I would say to them, no, because when I look in the mirror, you know who I see? I see Chuck with a high and tight with the big Smokey Bear campaign cover on, pressed uniform, badges, honor. And I said, this is all a facade. But here I was in that uniform every day with a high and tight. And I'd put my uniform on, and I'd look in the mirror and I'd cry because I saw someone that was, I don't like using this word anymore, but I saw a junkie. I saw someone that just couldn't function in life. I lived 2 lives, 8 hours as a cop and then 8 hours of someone using drugs and then sleep for an hour and do it all again.
Yeah.
And eventually that caught up with me. And I want to just get on with our story. We went in a little deep in here, and I want to get to some of your questions. But it got to the point where taking drugs for the evidence room caught up to me, and I was arrested, and I was charged with tampering with evidence, and I was sentenced to 2 to 4 years in the state prison system. Jeez. So I went from being a state trooper to a state prisoner.
Wow.
I went from controlling society to being totally controlled. Yeah. And it's one of the toughest things in my life. And I look back now and think about, even though I wasn't close to him, God was with me and he protected me through that, because there was a lot of dangerous incidents while I was an inmate.
I was going to say, going from a cop to in prison, the inmates find out what you used to do. Am I right?
Eventually, they try to keep it. They try to keep it quiet, and they try to move me to places.
Yeah.
But, it got out.
Yeah.
And next thing you know, you were getting attacked or jumped, and
wow.
And then they'd move you to another prison and to another prison, and I got bounced around. And the other thing that was tough about that is they put you in what's called protective custody.
Okay.
And protective custody is nothing but being in the hole. You are literally locked up 23 hours a day.
By yourself.
For the 1 hour that you're allowed to walk around, you're in a cage like a dog kennel. It could be outside or it could just be in an open area, and you can literally walk up and down it for an hour.
That's horrible.
And then you're locked up, and it was,
For how long? A year or?
There were months at a time
Yeah.
that I was in that, and it varied. It was initially 30 days here, 40 days here, went to another jail, and there's a ton of little sidebar stories.
Yeah.
Here, I do have to put the shameless plug out there, Matt, and you and I have been talking about this for a couple of years, but I did just sign a deal to write this book, State Trooper to State Prisoner.
No way, that's amazing.
It's going to be called.
That's going to be a great.
Both Sides of the Fence: My Walk with the Lord.
Wow.
And
it's been in the making for a little while.
I think. Absolutely has. Here was the thing. The opening page of the book, and your guests will appreciate this. It's like a cliffhanger. The opening page talks about, the dichotomy between a trooper and a prisoner. And, there's an inmate number where my badge once was. And my heart was filled with shame and guilt. And I had a sentence in there. And it said, I once was a cop, but now I'm a con. And there was a period there. And I never knew how this book would end.
Yeah.
Like, okay, now I'm a barber. That's not good. But now what God's done in my life, there's such an ending. And I've changed that sentence to, I once was a cop, and then I was a con, comma, but God.
Yeah.
And
you got all these things that you can add.
And what God has done and the stories after that. And what I really realized through that is something that I say pretty often, and I don't want to wear it out, but God has turned my mess into a message, and it's a message now that resonates with the people that I visit.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I get out of prison, I kind of start my life over. I run an asphalt business for a while.
Okay.
I get remarried. I have a daughter, so I have my son and daughter. And I went through a second divorce, and alcohol took over my life. And that's what brought me back to Pittsburgh was my father was 90 years old, my World War II veteran father, and I moved back here to take care of him. And I thought that would also keep me sober. And it did somewhat.
Yeah.
The responsibility of taking care of my dad. But it brought me back here to Pittsburgh. And then after he passed away, I had a really rough go at staying sober.
Yeah.
And one of the greatest screw yous to the devil that I get to do every week is this. I have the keys to the Allegheny County Jail. So when I walk in there, and
weren't you in that?
In 2018, I was in that on that pod a number of times
Same.
in a red jumpsuit where I now go in and preach.
Wow.
And when I tell these guys, because when you go in and they first they'll say, yeah, don't listen to that guy. He's paid to be here. What does he know? And I'm like, no, guys, I want to tell you that I'm only here for one reason. I'm not paid, because I know what it feels like to be here. And I know the despair and the loneliness that you have.
Yeah.
And I want to introduce you to a man that'll never leave you.
Yeah.
Never forsake you.
Mm-hmm.
Always be there for you. That will give you a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's amazing, after been through all of that, to now go after people that struggle with incarceration,
Yeah.
a life of crime, alcohol dependence, substance use disorder. I know exactly what those feel like, and I know the despair that someone has when they're going through that. So that just went, kind of went really quickly through my state trooper days and to like where I'm at now. And all of those relationships, all of those stories that I've been through, all of the trauma that I've been through, has been something now that I realize, God didn't want me to do it.
Yeah.
But he's now that I did that, he's using it for his glory.
Yep.
And it's been great.
The devil meant for bad, God turned it into good.
Amen.
And now you started impacting lives and changing people,
Exactly.
So you get out of, so your father passed away, and you went back to a little bit of substance abuse. Then who sent you to barber school? How did you go to barber? Because I feel like that would also help people who might be listening to this, who might be fresh out. They're trying to get their life together, get a job. There was an organization, I think, in Pittsburgh that helped you?
Yeah, that kind of helped me get reestablished. So in 2009, I was 44, and I thought it would be cool to own a barber shop.
Yeah.
So I went to hair school, learned how to cut hair.
Okay.
And so I was already a barber.
Oh, okay.
But, in 2018, with DUIs and things like that, I
Okay.
had lost my license.
Okay, I didn't know that.
I didn't keep my license up to date. So there
Okay.
was a local organization called Veterans Leadership Program.
Okay.
When I got out of treatment, I spent 90 days in treatment. And when I got out of that treatment, they helped me reestablish my barber license.
Okay.
And give me a set of tools and kind of get back on track.
Interesting. Okay. Veterans Leadership. Say it again.
Veterans Leadership Program.
Veteran Leadership
They're a nonprofit that's they're subsidized or funded by the Department of Labor.
Okay.
And they have a series of programs to help anyone struggling with like mental illness, drug addiction, suicide, to get you back on track. And so they receive grants, and like if you're a carpenter, they'll buy you a new set of tools, or like me as a barber.
Okay.
There's different funds and different programs, and then they'll help with housing if there's a veteran that's unsheltered.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. So then take us up to speed. Then you get your license activated again. You're cutting hair one day, and then somebody comes in, sits down, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And then that's how you got back involved with church.
Absolutely.
So tell us what happened there.
So yeah, I did get sober, and that was totally secular.
Yeah.
I started working at a barbershop in Lawrenceville, and there was a guy cutting someone's hair once, and he calls me over. He's like, "Hey, I want you to meet this guy. He's an evangelist." And I looked at him. I'm like, "What's an evangelist?" And he goes, "Oh, I preach." And there was this guy. He's now a pastor. His name's Jonathan. And so I meet him casually, and the guy that was cutting his hair had told him that I worked undercover with the mob in the past. And he asked me questions about that. He was like, "Hey, I'm infatuated with the mob. Tell me some stories."
Yeah.
Told him a couple stories. But it was interesting that day. I was dating my wife. I'm married to Laura now. And I was dating her at the time, and I went home that day, and I said, "You know what? Man, I met this guy in a barbershop, and there's something about it. I'm drawn to his spirit. There's something about him." And we Googled him, and there's good things and there's bad things.
Yeah.
But, I just thought, well, that was a really weird feeling. I've never really experienced something like that. The guy comes in 2 weeks later. He's getting his hair cut. Someone else is cutting his hair. And he calls me over, and he goes, "Hey, I heard you were a sniper, Chuck." And I was like, "Yeah." He goes, "I play Call of Duty. Give me some pointers." So we laughed, and, we talked about shooting and Call of Duty and some stuff. And I had that same feeling again. I went home, and I told Laura about it. A couple weeks had passed, and then I have a dream, and this is the dream, Matt, that really changed my life. It was a true calling. in my dream, I got off of an elevator and I was in an office building. I knew it was an office building. There was a number of rooms. There was a hallway. And in my head, for some reason, I knew there were 2 church services going on. And I looked in one room and there was a bunch of guys in there and I just didn't feel comfortable. And I looked to the other room and it was this Jonathan guy, this evangelist guy. And I had met him in jeans and a t-shirt, very casual. He was in a suit, and he was holding his Bible, and he looked at me, and he says, Brother Chuck, come follow me, man. I'm going to lead you to the Lord.
Wow.
The Lord loves you. He's got a job for you. For these end times, you're going to lead many souls to his kingdom.
Wow.
And it was the most vivid dream. And I remember sitting up in bed and like, wow. It's like one of those dreams you don't want to forget because it felt so real.
Yeah.
So obviously it was burned into my mind. I get up, I tell Laura about it. She goes, well, that's really weird. I wonder what that means. 4 hours later, I'm in the barber shop and this Jonathan guy walks in. And the guy that normally cut his hair wasn't there that day. And he goes, hey, Chuck, can you fit me in? I'm like, yeah. So he sits down and I, as your audience has already heard, I'm a little emotional at times now. This is all God. This wasn't, Chuck didn't cry before.
Yeah.
But so I get choked up and I said, you came to me in a dream last night. And he's like, oh, yeah, what did little dream me say? I said, you told me that God loves me and I need to get saved and give my life to the Lord because he's got a job for me. And he said, have you ever given your life to the Lord, Chuck? And I said, no, I don't know. What does that mean? I've been baptized as an infant.
Right.
No, he said, have you ever publicly declared that Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior? And I said, no. He goes, let's do it right here. Wow. So we did it right there in the barbershop in front of everybody. I'm crying. Everyone's pretending not to notice.
Yeah.
And it was, I really felt like God, like I really felt the presence of God that day.
Yeah.
And I really felt something wash over me. And I went home and I told Laura. And so another couple weeks go by and I started telling Laura, I said, Laura, this guy Jonathan said he's going to be opening a church here in Pittsburgh soon. You and I should start going to church. She's like, well, I went to church as a kid. And, Laura and I both grew up Catholic and nothing against the Catholic faith, but we had fallen away from it. And so 2 weeks later, this Jonathan guy comes in for a haircut. And he said, Chuck, your dream you mentioned an office building. And I said, yeah. He goes, you're not going to believe this. We just leased an office building that we're going to have church in. I'm going to have church in 2 months. I'd love for you to come. So I missed the very first Sunday, but I came the second Sunday. Yeah. And Matt, when I walked into that building and I looked at the elevator on the first floor, that was the same elevator from my dream. And I just felt this warm rush come over me. And I was like, okay, God, I'm yours.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And that was the start of it, you know, and literally
like the building of your faith back up and connecting with God. And
yeah, and then started getting involved in church and wanted to do like the usher work and security work, and we had a little veterans group at the church, and it made me really want to go find the lost. I started getting this burning thought in my head that, okay, God just gave me a gift. I feel like a new creature. I want to share this gift with people. And after about 4 months in the church, we were at a service, and during that service, I was prayed over and actually was baptized in the Holy Spirit. And that I'll never forget, coming home and sitting down with Laura and say, Laura, we can't go to church and live together. This isn't going to work. We need to get married or I need to move out. And we agreed to get married. And right around the time we got married, 30 days later, and right around the time we got married, our church had an outreach to Sturgis. And,
yeah. Oh, I didn't realize that was right after. Yeah.
It was right after.
Man.
So,
and she came, you guys came like middle of the week or something.
Yeah,
that was like your honeymoon.
That was our honeymoon.
Coming to Sturgis.
Our honeymoon was to go to Sturgis
about that. Yeah,
and win souls.
Wow.
And that's where it really hit me, Matt. That's where it really hit me, that there's so many people that are lost out there and they just don't know.
Yeah. Don't know how to get on track.
Yeah, they don't know how to get on track, or they don't know what the Lord has for them, And it really... I think it was shortly after that, a group of us from the church had gone out as Veterans Brigade, and we went downtown and walked around downtown and had a number of encounters with homeless people on drugs, and saw demons cast out of people and led people to the Lord.
Yeah,
that's where it really hit me that's my calling in life. And when I think back to that dream, you know, you're going to lead many souls to my kingdom. You know, I had no idea it would be at this magnitude and this quick, but that's how our Lord works, Matt.
Man, and he used probably all your past experiences, right? To just connect with people, to relate with people. At least that's how I see it. I mean, you're so relational and you know, you can connect with people very easily, but that's powerful.
Yeah, so what I've realized is once I've totally given my life to the Lord, he's restored everything in my life. Even restored my relationship with the Pennsylvania State Police again. So what had happened a month or two after I got saved, I get a call from some guys I used to work with, former state troopers, undercover guys. Hey, Chuck, we formed this organization. It's a nonprofit out of St. Joe's University. We're teaching a class to police officers, and it's called the Center for Addiction and Recovery Education. We're teaching police officers about the dangers of addiction. If you're an undercover officer, if you're a SWAT team guy, and or if you're stopping people, we want to teach you about addiction.
Yeah.
So they asked me to become a consultant. So I went through their training course, and here I was starting to tell that story that I just told to your guests to hundreds of police officers all around this country. I mean, this county and this side of the state. And that's what led me to prison ministry. It just all fell into place.
All connected.
I was teaching this class on disease and addiction to the Allegheny County Adult Probation Department. There were 90 officers over a 4-day period. I shared part of my testimony and story. And this one guy comes to me and he goes, Chuck, he goes, I oversee Veterans Court. We meet in the courthouse once a week with veterans. They're on like this special probation. I would love for you to come in and there's like 50 of them. Come in and give your testimony and tell them what happened in your life and where you are now.
Yeah.
So I came in, gave my testimony. The judge loved us. You know, she's like, man, I'd like to court order people to your program. I'm like, well, we don't have one yet.
Yeah.
You know, here we are 2 years later with a full program. But she had talked to the warden at the Allegheny County Jail, and the warden had called me and said, Chuck, we have a veterans pod here in the Allegheny County Jail. Would you consider coming in and just sharing your testimony?
Yeah.
And so on a whim, first time I've been back in a prison setting, you know, I walk in, I go up to the veterans pod. God's blessed me with the ability to just, as everyone now can see, spew.
Yeah.
So I started talking, and I realized the guys really enjoyed it. So the warden had called me a couple days after I visited and said, Chuck, would like you to bring you in again next week. And then it was like, would like to bring you in, you know, you could be part of our programming. Man. No experience. I have never once called anybody to speak anywhere. And I have literally spoken in 50
everywhere.
Places in the last 3 years, right?
I know.
And
that's why I asked you today. Are you getting tired of sharing your story?
No, because God gets all the glory. That's why. And it's an ongoing story. So after speaking in the jail a few times, I went back on a regular basis. So not this past November, but the November before, like a year and a half ago now. Myself and my partner, my co-founder on the mission, his name is Ken. Ken's a Marine.
Okay.
He was a highly decorated Marine combat sergeant that was injured in combat and got put on pain pills, got hooked on opiates, and was literally a homeless heroin addict here in Pittsburgh for 3 years.
Jeez.
We meet. That's another God story for another time. But we meet in the barbershop, me cutting his hair, and we realize we both have the heart for the lost.
Right.
So I invite him into 3 prison settings the week of Veterans Day. And this is the second time that God came to me in a dream. And this is how the Semper Fi mission was born. So after 4 days in a row of going into prisons, it was a Thursday night. It was around 3:15 in the morning. And I had a dream. And in my dream, I got up and I was addressing a large crowd of prisoners. I mean, there were hundreds of men, like something like you see some videos of like San Quentin prison or something like that. Hundreds of guys in blue. And I stood up and I said, good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Chuck. This is my brother, Ken. And we're here from the Semper Fi mission. and we're here to lead you to the Lord. For your guests, I have Semper Fidelis tattooed on there, which means always faithful. So for the first time in my life, I said the word Semper Fi mission. I sat right up in my bed. I grabbed my phone and I heard God speak to me, and he said, that's what I want you to call it. So I Googled semperfimission.org.
Okay.
It was available.
Yeah.
And I bought the URL that night.
No way.
I love looking back at that.
That's amazing.
You can't make this stuff up,
Yeah.
man. And
that's incredible.
Yeah, so I called Ken the next day and I said, Ken, we got to get at this. There are souls out there. And we laugh because the Marine Corps was born in a tavern, Tun's Tavern. That's where the Marine Corps started, in a bar.
Okay.
The whole idea, the concept of the Marine Corps. So the whole idea of Semper Fi mission started in a barbershop. So Ken would come in every 2 or 3 days. I'd sometimes cut his hair, sometimes not. But we started to have meetings and we started to form this stuff.
Conversations and stuff. Wow, that's incredible. And now, okay, so I want to promote your barbershop and I want to promote Semper Fi mission. So your barbershop, real quick, and then we'll get to Semper Fi. Your barbershop is located in the North Hills.
In the North Hills. It's on McKnight Road.
Yep.
4771 McKnight Road.
Okay.
The landmark that I tell everybody is it's right next door to El Campesino restaurant, which is the famous Mexican restaurant on, it's about a half mile south of the Ross Park Mall. It's on the left-hand side. Valor Men's Grooming, you can use the app. It's called Booksy. You can book an appointment. We do appointments only. So right now I'm there most days, Tuesday through Saturday. I'm there from 8 to 4. And we have another great barber. His name is Frankie. Frankie the barber is there from 4 to 9 every night. So you have almost 13 hours every day to get your haircut.
Available haircuts.
And we have been able to keep up with the demand. We have over 700 clients right now. But everyone loves the shop because it's like this.
Yeah. It's
a one-on-one setting.
Sit down.
Men can be men. You can talk. You can vent. It has turned into an evangelist chair.
Yeah.
And I've been able to share what God has done in my life. And I wish I would have kept track of how many people, relationship that I have now, started out as a haircut, and now they're part of my mission. Now they're in church with me. Now they're in Bible school. Now they're saving souls.
Yeah.
It has just been this amazing full circle moment and we kind of have an ongoing joke, both Frankie and I, who's also loves the Lord. We do barbering and we do evangelism. So we're coining the phrase barvangelist.
Barvangelist.
We're official barvangelists.
I love it.
And there has been so many stories where people have come in and said, man, this was so much more than a haircut. This is what I needed to hear when I needed to hear it. I was missing this piece of my life.
Yeah.
I have guys. So there's people I still cut their hair, Matt, that 4 or 5 years ago when I was still drinking, when I was still cursing, when I was still the old Chuck. I never made an announcement. Hey, this is Chuck.
Right.
I'm a new creature in Christ, and we don't swear in here. I never said a word. I watch men, guy after guy, become convicted. Like they'll curse and be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't tell them."
You never said a word.
It just happens.
Yeah.
And I had one guy come in one time, Matt, and it was really eye opening. And he's this crazy little Turkish guy. And he has this crazy accent, and he's a really smart guy. He's a computer software guy. He works with drones.
Okay.
But he's a DJ for rave parties. And he'd party, and he's women. He used to come in and tell me all these stories.
Yeah.
Even when I wasn't saved, I'm like, whoa, he's up on that, And he came in a few months ago, and he looked at me in his crazy little accent. He's like, Brother Chuck, I don't want to talk about drugs. I don't want to talk about women. I don't want to talk about anything.
Yeah.
Tell me about your God.
No way.
Right?
Wow.
So
what an opportunity.
Yeah. So I got to tell him about the Lord, and he grew up Muslim and didn't really know anything. And, got to share to him, that we have the true living God, that's still alive today.
Yeah.
And that there's no other God that's been written about that's still alive. And about an hour after he left, and we prayed with him, he didn't give his life to the Lord the first time.
Yeah.
But he had agreed to go to church after the first 40 minutes of hearing about Jesus. he came in about an hour later. He rang my buzzer, like to the security buzzer, to come in. And I thought I messed up his haircut. I'm like, Sir Tosh, you okay? He goes, no, I brought my girlfriend. I want you to tell her everything you told me about this Jesus.
Wow. That's crazy.
Which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
You know, and there's story after story about that, Matt.
Barvangelist for sure.
So yeah, we formed this Semper Fi mission, and we have some major pillars. We do prison ministry.
Okay.
We do homeless outreach. And what I realized, and this is how, you know, God made me a barber for a lot more than just to give good fades, right? He knew that this was going to segue into this. So as I'm doing the prison ministry early on, I also drive from the South Hills to the North Hills every day. And I see people on the street corners, you know, homeless veteran, need help, handout. So I'd carry water with me. And I had these little cards made up for people to get a free haircut. So I would just give them a card and say, hey, man, you know, there's a better way. I know how you feel. I once struggled with alcohol. I once struggled with drugs.
Right.
Come to my barbershop. Let me give you a free haircut, and let's talk. And I started to see a number of guys coming up to the shop. And there's been a number of times where after a 30-minute haircut, I've got them softened up enough to go into treatment. Like I've driven guys, and this is God, no, like 2 treatment centers from my barbershop, 2 detoxes, you know, to the VA emergency room. You know, let's go get you some help. So that haircut stuff. So in addition to our prison ministry, which is every week, we've expanded to a bunch of other floors of that jail. We've gone into the state prison in Mercer, and I started this conversation out talking about my state trooper buddy, John Bay, who's the director of the Dauphin County Prison. We went out there in March, and we're actually going back there next Monday, and we're bringing a team of 7 men.
That's crazy.
To come back in and kick the devil around for 7 or 8 hours.
And that'll be your first time back at that same prison?
It'll be our second visit as a group there. Yeah. So the prison ministry continues to expand. And then what we've done is we've taken this barvangelism thing to another level. You know, just earlier this morning, we had an event, and we have it once a month. Today was the 10th visit. We call it prayer cuts. And this is funny how it happened.
Yep.
There was a guy in my chair, and he's on the board of director. He's an elder at the First Presbyterian Church.
Okay.
So I said, you know what? You guys have homeless meals down there. What if I came in and like offered haircuts, you know, in between while people getting a meal? And he's like, yeah, I think it would be a great idea. So I started to do it, and I brought another barber with me, and we started to get overwhelmed. There's like 15 people on the list. Everyone wants their haircut. So I talked to this guy, and I said, you know what? I wonder if the church would let us use the church on a Monday. Most barbers and hairdressers are off on a Monday. Yeah. So he went. He met with the board, the board of directors for the church, and he said, "Yeah, what's your thought?" I said, "Well, we want to do a meal for these people. If they're coming in for a haircut, we'll provide a meal while they're waiting. We want to have clothing, hygiene items, like the provisions, just basic provisions." And I said, "And along with every haircut, we want to do prayer." And he looks at me. He goes, "Prayer and haircuts." Like prayer cuts, and it stuck. I mean, we have that Instagram page now. It's prayer cuts, and it stuck, and it's incredible. This was our 10th month, and we averaged somewhere between 60 and 80 haircuts.
Man, that's incredible.
Every month, you know, to have 700 or 800 people come through, and while we're cutting hair, I have like. We've had up to 8 different barbers and 5 and 6 different female hairdressers, so we're able to cover the whole population. We have the veteran hospital from Aspinwall is now busing like 24 to 30 guys down there for the haircuts. But it's about the talk. It's about you know, the other barbers that are with me sharing their experience, strength, and hope with someone that's struggling, and say, "Hey, man, you can get over that."
Yeah.
There's a place called Vet's Place. They bring people. Shepherd's Heart. They bring people, and then just the homeless population from the city.
Yeah.
It's funny now, Matt. If you and I go walk downtown, I could get out on any corner and you'd hear, oh, it's Barber Chuck.
Yeah.
Oh, it's the Semper Fi guy. It's amazing. And I love this population. And I love that we've pulled people out. And I know I just go on and on, but I got to say, which is really cool. We were having one of these prayer cuts a couple months ago, and we get everyone a black T-shirt, and it says God's Army on the back and Semper Fi Mission on the front. And I was looking at the people that were our guests.
Okay.
They were homeless or they were from this VA hospital. And I said, guys, I'm sitting here and talking to you. And as I look over at our volunteers, there are 7 volunteers in a black T-shirt that were in your seat 2 months ago.
Jeez.
I was trying to keep them anonymous.
Yeah.
And this guy's like, yeah, I met Chuck in the jail, And the other guy goes, yeah, I was homeless 2 months ago, but I got a place to live now.
Yeah.
So like things like prayer cuts, and we were believing God that eventually we would have housing for these veterans, and that also has come to fruition.
It's in the works.
No, we have a veterans recovery house in Clairton.
No way.
We have a 13,000 square foot home where we are housing veterans right now.
Oh, I think I did see the post then. Okay, I wasn't sure. Wow.
You were thinking about the other. We do have some other ongoing.
Okay, so you have a house in Clairton, 13 bedrooms, you said?
It's 13,000 square feet.
Okay.
It has an occupancy of 10 right now.
Okay.
We think we can get that bumped up to about 15 because there's so much room there.
Yeah.
But we have taken it over from another couple that was, had the same thought as us, wanted to help. They had some issues in their life, some personal struggles.
Okay.
And so they're like, we want you guys to take this over. So we have a lease to purchase agreement with them now.
Okay.
But so we do have the Cornerstone residence.
Okay.
So, Semper Fi Mission, Valor Men's Grooming,
the
Cornerstone residence, prayer cuts, the social media goes on and on.
That's incredible.
If your guests want to. And that's just another way where it's all Christian based.
Yep.
It's all God based.
Yep.
And we have 2 other really big projects. Out of the blue, about 3 months ago, we had a business owner downtown offer us a 12-story building, and said, "I bought this a few years ago. I didn't know what it was going to be for, but now I do.
Man,
I love what you're doing.
That's crazy.
I want to get behind you. I want to do a 20-year lease with you guys. I want you guys to come in. I want us to have housing there. It's going to be 53 bedrooms. It's going to have workforce development, and we got some really exciting things.
Yeah.
I would love for you to have Ken and I on here as we
Absolutely.
get to roll out some of the meetings. Ken was just in Florida talking with a company that's going to provide virtual reality training at our current house, as well as, and that we're going to roll into the Allegheny County Jail, but it's all going to be part of the Semper Fi mission.
Semper Fi. Man, oh man.
Do you remember Brother Luke that was suffering from ALS? He was the Navy veteran that was in a wheelchair.
Last name? Well, I don't know if you want to share his last name.
Yeah. Liggett.
Okay.
Remember, we were going to have a veterans event at his farm. He has a farm,
okay.
Strong Christian.
Yeah, I remember.
Heaven Sent Farm.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So we had a big Veteran Appreciation Day on March the 16th of this year, so 2 months ago, right? Mm-hmm. After that Veteran Appreciation Day, Luke came. Luke sent me a text message, and he prophesied over Semper Fi mission. And I want to share that with you personally someday, but just to summarize it, he said Semper Fi mission is going to be larger than you can even imagine. It's going to be in every major U.S. city. This is going to be, you're going to have medical procedures. You're going to have lawyers and doctors on staff that are going to do things that the VA won't do. And don't think small. This is just the very beginning.
Yeah.
He texted me that prophecy. And then 2 days later, we got our first building. And then we got the Cornerstone house.
Yeah.
And now we have this
other future
virtual reality programming coming up. And then we have another house, another property in Beaver that we're going to developing into 15 efficiency apartments for veterans. So that's going to be like the next step. Once they get done with the Cornerstone and they get done at our downtown building, we'll have these. And then in addition to those, there are 14 townhouses they're building next to them that these guys are going to be able to lease to own.
Man,
it's just a lot of pieces of the puzzles.
Yeah.
And Matt, it's unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
and it all goes back to, and I want to give you a chance to like interview me. You know, I feel like I just rambled.
No, this is what I want. I want to interview people, and I want to give people a space to talk. This is not about me or button in or anything like that. I just think that's incredible, especially with the prayer cuts is huge for me because I'm just picturing somebody coming in off the street, hadn't had a good haircut in a long time. You know, as I do, as a guy, when you get a good haircut, you know, you feel like $1 million, you know, and it puts a smile on your face. But to not only get a good haircut, feel good, and then to get prayer over that, it's like you comboed to amazing combo to impact.
It is,
these
Matt.
guys'
Like
lives.
a haircut, there's studies that it actually releases endorphins.
I bet it does.
And even when you're feeling good, a good haircut makes you feel better.
Right.
So when you're at your worst, and you get cleaned up, and,
Yeah.
you know, maybe you're going to go apply for a construction job tomorrow, you know, and you've been, you know, kind of disheveled, to clean someone up, to give them their dignity back.
Yeah.
There's something about barbering where you're touching another human being that kind of breaks a barrier. You're a little more intimate with them.
Yep.
And, you know, if you're on the street and you want to pray with someone, hey, can I pray with you? Can I put my hand on you? Here you've already done that.
You've already done that.
You know, washing their hair, combing their hair. There's something about that that's why I think this bar evangelist thing, we're on to something.
Perfect.
A perfect segue from caring for someone. You know, Jesus washed feet. You know, we take care of their needs. And it opens up something into their soul because they could tell you care about them.
Yeah.
And you don't care if their hair is unkept or not washed or, you know, and you treat them with dignity. And when you give someone their dignity back, that's the first step that someone needs.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
When I look at who is it that we serve, who does the Semper Fi mission serve? You know, Matt, we're going after everybody that society looks down on. You know, they're like the lepers of today. They're going to cross the street. No one's going to want to be with them. You know, don't enable them. Don't give them money. Don't give them water. You know, it's a choice to be no, it's not. You know, it's demonic. It's the devil. It's his way into people's hearts, souls. And we have the power to break that. Like, who wouldn't want to break that chain? Who wouldn't want to pull someone up out of it? And it's hard work, Matt. It is hard. And we don't hit a home run every time. And we do see people that have kind of rotated back, but I had something pretty interesting happen in the jail the other day that I got to share with you.
Let's hear it.
So we talk about how God is so involved in your life, right? And he cares about the little details.
You're right.
So I was at the Allegheny County Jail about a month ago, and the deputy warden, who I've worked with very closely, she's an amazing person. She had sent me an email and said, hey, we have a new warden to take over the jail. I want to come down Monday and introduce him to you. So I'm in the setting on the pod. And I think you've been there with me.
Yeah,
right,
yeah. I loved going in with you, and I want to go back because it was powerful being there that day.
Wait till you see what we've turned this into.
Yeah.
This service that we have now, music, everything.
Oh,
right?
really? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
See,
and so this guy walks in, and the deputy says to me, Chuck, this is Trevor Wingard. He's the deputy, or he's the new warden. And I'm like, Trevor, it's nice to meet you, sir. And he looks at me and he smiles, and he's a real tall guy. He said, you don't remember me, do you, Chuck? And I said, no, I'm sorry. Where would I know you from? He said, I was your unit commander when you were a prisoner in the state prison in Somerset.
wow.
He got all teary-eyed. He goes, brother, we don't get to see this side of people, of how people turn it around. He said, but to know you then and to see you now, and he goes, as soon as I took the job as a warden here, everyone's talking about this Chuck Ondo guy. And he goes, I think I know him. He goes, and when I looked at your Facebook page and saw your picture, he goes, yeah, that's the same guy that was one of my inmates.
Jeez.
He said, for you to turn around and what you're doing now means so much. And he's like, if you ever have any questions in here, he goes, I was in the state prison systems for years. If you need help getting into any of those jails, if you want to continue your ministry there, just let me know. I just thought that
that's powerful.
it was a little full circle moment that, God had this stuff lined up years ago. Years ago.
And if that doesn't give hope to somebody who's fresh out of jail, a veteran, a homeless person, struggling to find a job, struggling to find direction in their life, man, I don't know what does, because it's amazing watching your story from one thing to another, and God connecting you to one person to another and turning everything full circle and then impacting lives.
It's
Absolutely
is so full circle. And, I love to share stories about how God confirms his love for us, or confirms what you're doing, because a lot of times, if you're out there and if you're a man that's involved in ministry or part-time ministry or full-time ministry, you're going to have like some doubts. Like, am I doing what I'm supposed to do? Is this God's will for my life?
Yep.
And we're our own worst critic. But there's just so many things that God does on a regular basis that really confirms that he's with you. And, now for the third time, I'll talk about this prison ministry out in Dauphin County. So a group of us went up the night before, and the whole drive up, where we all know each other, but we're sharing our testimonies a little more in depth of our personal struggles in the past, and why we're doing this and why we feel led to doing this. So we get to this Airbnb, and it was 10:30 at night. We're all sitting around. We're on a couch. Everyone's got their Bible out. Everyone's talking about what they're going to talk about the next day. And God just keeps bringing up everything in our lives that we've gone through. Out of the blue, Matt, I get a text message from a number that I don't have saved. It's a 412 number.
Okay.
And it says, Brother Chuck, read Psalm 103. God loves you. I was like, guys, did somebody send this to me?
Yeah.
We weren't talking about Psalm 103. We were talking about a lot of the Bible, but not that one. I open up Psalm 103 and I read it. And 4 or 5 verses into it, like all of us start crying. Because it was everything we were just talking about.
No way.
It was...
Talk about the Holy Spirit
and
how God moves.
And, one of the things that we kept talking about as a group is how forgiven we feel now for all the wrong that we've done. And that's in Psalm 103, it does say is, your sins are as far as the east is from the west.
Amen.
Man, and we read down through that, and, Jesse was there, Jesse and Jared, this guy, Kalen, and we're like, wow. And I looked at that, and I looked at that text again. I had not exchanged a text message with that person since like 2023.
Okay.
And it was about the barbershop. So I sent him a text later. I said, hey, the next day.
Yeah.
I said, why at 10:30 at night? He goes, man, Brother Chuck, I don't know. I was reading the Bible. I was doing my nighttime devotions. And I really said, send this to Chuck. I said, well, that's how the Holy Spirit works. It's pretty cool to be part of
crazy.
that. And God to confirm things by putting people in your life or saying certain things. And then, with our mission, anytime that we have an expense coming up or we plan something, 2 days later we'll get a check from somebody anonymous. We'll get a, hey, wanted to bless you.
Yeah.
And it's been that way.
That's amazing.
When we started the Semper Fi mission, Ken and I said the key word in that is faithful. We're going to be faithful to what the Lord calls us to do, but then we're going to be faithful to Him, and we're going to trust Him. And we're not doing GoFundMe's, and we're not a ministry that needs.
Right.
We supply needs. God's going to take care of that back end stuff. And man, it's been amazing to be part of that.
Wow.
And we experienced that today.
That's
Finished the prayer
amazing.
cuts. A guy walking out that was a volunteer, hands us an envelope and just paid for our next prayer cuts. Put it that way.
That's crazy. That's amazing.
That's amazing.
So if anybody wants to get in touch with Chuck or Semper Fi Mission or get a fresh haircut at his barbershop, people can find you on Instagram.
It's Valor Men's Grooming.
Okay, Valor Men's Grooming.
Semper Fi Mission.
Yep.
And then Ondo Chuck.
OndoChuck.com.
All three of them are
what?
linked. No, Ondo Chuck is just my handle on Instagram.
Okay.
And then on Facebook, it's Chuck Ondo and Semper Fi Mission.
Okay.
So, go with Semper Fi Mission. Forget about me. Go with Semper Fi Mission on Facebook and Instagram.
Okay.
We have a website.
Okay.
It's semperfimission.org.
All right.
and the Cornerstone residents. If you feel led to be part of it, we're a volunteer-based organization, for the prison ministry. We've been asked to go speak at 5 or 6 additional pods in this jail. We've been asked to go speak at other jails. That's growing. If you feel called to
people,
either
right?
men or women's prison ministry,
Okay.
please send us a message on social media. If you would like, we have this prayer cut event. If you're a barber, hairstylist, we need you. Come on.
Yeah.
If you're not, we still hand out food and clothing and hygiene items. And we have a ministry team that walks around, and as these people are waiting for a haircut, it's neat to see it. It's like you see the Lord working, because you see people with the barbers and you see people getting prayed for.
Yeah.
And then the other people like, hey, what's that? What's he doing?
Right.
Hey, and we have guys that walk around, guys and girls. Hey, do you want some prayer?
Yeah.
I love saying that to someone.
That's
Would you like prayer?
yeah.
And man, do people just it opens up the floodgates to what there's so many people hurting and have no idea that there's people that can walk with them through that. So we do an outreach. It's the last Saturday of every month.
Okay. That's
on the north side, Matt.
Okay.
We do it from like 1 to 4 p.m. on a Sunday. Again, we provide a catered warm meal. We started those. March was a year since we had been doing our north side outreaches. The first outreach, we had 2 little card tables full of clothes and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Now, when you see us set up on the north side, there's 20 tents.
No way.
There's a warm meal going. There's caterers. There's, we'll have some worship music going. And, we get almost 150 people at anything that we do.
Wow.
That are in need.
That's crazy. God always supplies.
Yes, he
and
does.
He always provides.
Absolutely, Matt.
Thank you for being on this show. I think we might be running out of battery here eventually.
Okay.
I could talk to you for another 2 hours, but
Yeah, same, Matt.
I want people to get connected with you, especially what you mentioned, barbers, hairstylists. You want an opportunity to serve. I can't think of a better way to serve. Or even if, like you said, people just want to pray with people. I mean, that's an incredible opportunity. So check out Chuck Ondo, check out Semper Fi Mission, check out prayer cuts, everything that he has available and going on here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and stay tuned for some more. Thanks.